Kia ora koutou, everybody. Let us begin with a karakia. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga e te man ngaro. Ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahia te hua mā kihikihi. Kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te araha, toi te rau Māori. Kia tūturu ka whakamaua kia tina. Huye taiki e. Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome everyone. It is with real pleasure that we bring you this joint webinar with Community Research and Enviro Hub. Just in terms of our panel, our knowledgeable panel here, just want to send the apologies from Emma Hogan, who unfortunately is unable to make it today. To start with, we'll just do a round of whanaungatanga and I'll ask the panel members to introduce themselves. Georgina, shall we begin with you?
Yeah, kia ora koutou, ko Georgina Morrison toko ingoa. I am the Executive Officer for Environment Hubs Aotearoa.
And Jen?
Kia ora koutou, ko Jen toko ingoa. I'm Jen. I am the research lead for the project, was formerly with Environment Hubs Aotearoa. Thank you.
Kia ora. And Harata? Oh, you're just on mute, Harata.
Sorry, ko titirangi te maunga, ko tūranga nui te awa, ko Ngāti One te hapu, ko Rauri teke tua te rangi te tangata, ko Harata Gibson taku ingoa. I'm Charlotte, I'm the chairman at Poho Rauri Marae and also the chairman of Ngāti One hapu. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, ko David Hall toko ingoa, he tangata tiriti ahau. I am Executive Director and co-founder of the Toha Network, which is building digital infrastructure to support communities with climate resilience.
Kia ora. And ko Bev Chohong toko ingoa. I'm the Kaituhono Ethnic Research Liaison Lead, but also we spread our mahi with the small team across our organisation, and I have the pleasure of convening this webinar today. Our format for today is a overview of the research by Georgina, followed by some independent researcher comments and reflections from David, then some case study, marae-based case study, commentary from Harata. Then we will have some time for some questions and kōrero with the audience. So thank you very much for coming along to this webinar and finding out about this research. I was going to say this is very timely research, but it's always timely. I think this is the focus of this webinar. So really excited to hear from the panel members. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Georgina. Feel free to add Q&A questions as we go through, and panel members may respond to those as we're going through the webinar, but we'll also have time at the end to comment on those. And if you want to introduce yourselves to each other via the chat, and make comments, you're most welcome to as well. So kia ora and Georgina.
Kia ora, can I just check that my slides are showing?
Aye.
Beautiful, thank you. So thank you so much for hosting us. This has been a labour of love over the last several years, and it's really important that we can share it with the community. So thank you for hosting us, Community Research. So just to introduce you to Environment Hubs Aotearoa, we have 24 hubs across the motu. Our mission is to bring communities together and create lasting positive change for our environment and our communities and our future generations. So we are all across the country. So this is some of what we do. So collectively, we have a massive impact. We work across many areas of communities. That's just a bit of a snapshot, and we're continually growing on those numbers. So, most of you will be aware of the Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle that affected our Auckland communities, Northland, our East Coast. This was devastating. It caused loss of life. It really affected communities and tested our systems. What we did see is some beautiful responses. We had communities that stepped up. They did sandbagging. They provided housing, care, food, shelter. They really provided that wraparound service. They looked after our communities, both small and large, rural, urban, and they did what needed to be done. They really stepped up and they were absolutely fascinating. And it's just some of the snapshots that we've gathered from our communities. So there was a lot of really great stuff happening. And in the middle of Cyclone Gabrielle, we were connected with our hubs. We were hearing the stories from our people on the ground, and it felt really great. However, we were also hearing some stories of where some of these things were not being supported. Sometimes our hubs or other community services were stopped or impeded from supporting the community. And we were really shocked and surprised by that. So we decided to do some research. We wanted to hear from the community what was happening. And so Jennifer Pennell, Dr. Jennifer Pennell, who's on the call, and we had a conversation about how we could actually learn from these communities. Because what happened is when our emergency services were overwhelmed, the system didn't work well. The processes that were planned did not work. And so what we had is we had a response that sometimes connected to our people and our communities and sometimes didn't. And so we've just got some quotes there from our research about how the community really stepped up. And they sometimes did that themselves. So we had a bit of a disconnect where sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So in looking at doing this research, we worked with Massey University to get ethics approval. We conducted surveys, focus groups, and interviews, and we had a total of 374 participants from across the regions that we were looking at. So one of my favourite parts of the research is the feedback that we got from our participants. So these were absolutely poignant. They were absolutely integral to our research, and they were just such an important part of what we were learning. And you'll only be able to get a snapshot of what those are, but you can download our research on our website. And these were really the shining star of our research for me. So these pages are interspersed amongst our research, and they really ask for support. They ask for communities to be represented, to be at the table, to be acknowledged, to be resourced ahead of time. So these voices didn't often get heard in the other research that was happening. There have obviously been other official reviews and research. What we wanted to do was we really wanted to speak to the people on the ground, to the people that helped their communities, to the people that organised. They may not have already been an organisation, they may have just done it themselves. And so these are the voices that we talked to. We really wanted to get their voices heard so that we could learn for the future. So there's some more there. Some of the themes that we had coming through were really around supporting our local hubs and that investment piece. And a lot of it was around relationships as well. So actually respecting those community groups, which in some cases had been around for 30, 40 years. Sometimes they were new, but really they wanted those relationships built, and we can see that looking to the future, those relationships need to be built well ahead of time. So not just in the moment, not in the middle of a crisis, but really investing both resources and trust and time in those relationships. So this is one of the examples of the case studies in the research, and we heard from our community. Our participants told us how important that iwi and marae were in their response. And we have Shah on the call, which is really beautiful because she has a really great example of a community that stepped up and they realised that they had to respond in various ways. So not just food, but a wide variety of needs that their community had. And Shah's story is really interesting because it's not just the It's not just the response during the cyclone, but it's also the response afterwards. It's how our community partners have been supported by their council, and just how they've been treated. And also, I don't know how much time we have to listen to Sharon. I could listen to her all day, but it's also thinking about what's changed now that we've had our reviews, now that we understand how community organisations have been supported or not, but thinking about those actions, what we've learned, and whether councils have been able to actually implement some of the learnings. So the case studies throughout the research are really important. They show organisations learning during the events, and there's some really lovely ones from across the country of just what community organisations were being asked to do, whether they were resourced, and their experiences. So the culmination of our research was recommendations for building collaborative disaster resilience. They have been grouped into 6 different areas. You can see them there. So putting community at the heart of emergency management. And that looks like being invited to the table and being valued at the table. So every 4-6 weeks, your councils will be meeting. They'll be having emergency meetings where there might be iwi at the table, there might be community groups, but there might not. Māori leadership, as we've talked about, is really important. The Māori-led networks were incredibly important during the times that we've looked at, and that's just so critical to have that infrastructure resourced and supported ahead of time. Vulnerability and inclusion is really important. There's a really nice case study, Sustainable Hawke's Bay, where they were working with smaller communities, minority communities, and they were really thinking about accessibility. And that's something that we need to build into our disaster planning and make sure that that's proactive instead of thinking about those things during an event. We've got communication and coordination. So we've heard from our participants that communication was often broken down during the response. So it's something that there are systems that could be built and that could be better. Resourcing and capacity building, incredibly important. So thinking about just making those systems efficient, doing those ahead of time. We've seen many reports come out showing the very small proportion of proactive planning for emergencies as opposed to the enormous amount of money that's been spent on response. And obviously governance and policy. So addressing those kind of policy gaps, implementing national policy that really supports the local level emergency responses. So we've got a number of recommendations there in the report, and there's just an example of some of those on the right there. This is something that we have talked about in various hui since we've released the report. This is a suggestion of some conversations that you could have with your local council. What we don't want is for this resource and this research to get dusty on a shelf somewhere. We would love it to live on. And if every one of us went and had this conversation with our local council and asked some of these questions and talked to them about the recommendations, then that would be a really great way to value and respect the voices that we heard from our research. So these are the kind of questions that you might want to consider asking your council, and it would be fabulous to hear back from anyone who is bold enough and brave enough to have those conversations. And the reason that this is really important is that research shows us that children aged 10 or younger in 2020, and that's both my children, are expected to go through, so many more storms and extreme events compared to what we've had to go through. So this is coming. These events aren't something that we can avoid. We have amazing resourcing capability and capacity in our communities. So what we really want to get from these voices being shared in this is to learn and actually have action. So as I said, not putting this on a shelf, but honouring those voices, having those conversations with our councils, organising events where we ask the really big questions. So keen to get resilient and very happy to hear from our other participants as well on their experiences. Thanks.
Kia ora, thank you, Georgina. I'm just going to... You're amazingly concise at bringing together and wrapping around that research, including the different case studies and that were involved. So if people have got questions around that, please please put those in, because then we can expand as the audience interest kind of shows us. But I'm now going to pass on to David to get some independent research and reflections about this mahi. Kia ora, David.
Older. So, I mean, let me start with some high-level framing. I used to be an academic, so I often talk this way. But I think when we think about the economy, it's an economy at the moment which is dominated by the state and the market. And so a lot of the solutions that we see in events like this and climate adaptation are dominated by state and market approaches, whether it's large public investment into large infrastructure, or whether it's insurance as a market solution to these sorts of risks. But I think what is so valuable about the report was that it teases out the third pillar of the economy, and a pillar that we don't often talk about enough, which is community. And actually, a healthy economy would have a much better balance with more empowered communities who were better funded and better resourced to prop up that third pillar and not be quite as dependent on market and state solutions as they currently are. And I think, part of the trend here is that some of those market and state solutions aren't meeting the moment, especially as the frequency and intensity of climate-related events increases. And so it falls upon communities to help themselves as a matter of necessity. But as a matter of national strategy, it would make a lot more sense to take a proactive, strategic approach to that and to empower communities to be able to help themselves better in events like these. And I think it actually this is actually a wider theme as well about why we see some of the levels of political disenfranchisement and political disconnect today, a sense of lack of agency, not just in regards to climate adaptation, but a number of spheres around society at the moment. And I think, empowering communities is not just going to help with the specific challenge of climate adaptation, but I think it's going to result in more flourishing economies and more flourishing societies in a more general sense. And I just thought that's the approach that I take to these issues, and I thought the report just did a wonderful job of teasing that out and shining a light on some of those suspicions that I've been having, that communities were feeling that they were marginalized and not supported and not recognized as a source of, as an autonomous kind of actor in this space that can find their own solutions if they're enabled and empowered to do so. And the report as well had a number of insights that just struck me about again kind of common problems that we have, not just in the climate adaptation space, but they were so stark when presented in these circumstances. Like, one that struck my mind especially was the concept of unhelpful help, where resources were provided which actually the communities themselves didn't need or want. And I think this is a classic example of where some of these state and market-led solutions, they're just not connected enough to the people on the ground and the particular needs and interests that people have. Saying all of that, I think I should connect some of my work now with the Toha network. So as I said at the beginning, we are building digital infrastructure to support communities to take matters into their own hands during events like this. And one of the projects that we've enabled with our digital infrastructure, the East Coast Exchange, was one of the case studies in the report. So the East Coast Exchange uses the digital infrastructure to enable that community-led approach, and it enables communities to articulate their own challenges and to bring them to the platform, the online platform that we have, and then to seek resources. So we're the same team that built Give a Little, if that helps, the crowdfunding platform as a point of reference. And so this is taking that platform approach, but redirecting it towards these sorts of challenges, like how to empower and enable communities to uncover their own solutions. And so the East Coast Exchange so far has raised about 360,000 in grant funding, but also about $1.5 million through a pilot that we're running up in Rangatukia in the very far East Cape, whenua Māori land block called Te Kotuku. And there, the investment into the land is enabling the whānau there to restore the land, to enhance the biodiversity in existing forests, but also to plant new forest on erosion-prone land and to restore resilience to the whenua there. And that's a new approach that we're piloting that the East Coast Exchange is a platform for, and that's just an example of pulling in resources, pulling in funding and financing in different ways using these digital technologies so that communities can access this funding and financing and make their own decisions about how to spend that and to restore their own resilience, how they know best as the people living on the land within the ecosystems there. So that's a brief overview. If you'd like to ask anything more specific, I can talk to that. But
Good, thank you, David. Yep, so I'll encourage people to put questions in if they've got any queries for clarification. Just before we go to Harata to talk about the marae-based case study, I was wondering, Georgina, if you could just speak a little bit about the diversity of case studies, the different types of case studies that were part of the research, and then Harata can expand around the focus on the marae.
Yeah, so Harate will speak about hers. David's just mentioned Toha. We had a really lovely group in Warkworth. They were looking after people who were coming through, and they were building on some previous knowledge of an emergency. And so what that case study shows is actually how they were able to build on that knowledge and actually improve, and also looking to the future. We had Waiheke Island. That was a really interesting situation where the marae that was a civil defence base was actually in a bad location, and so it wasn't able to be used as a welfare centre. So kind of at the 11th hour, the Waiheke Resources Hub, which is an Enviro Hub, was asked to step up and provide that kind of wraparound welfare centre situation. And really interesting to think about the resourcing, and our system is not set up to pre-support these, whether it's a marae or whether it's a welfare centre. Often these things do happen at the 11th hour. So it was a bit of a scramble, but they were amazing. They did a lot of sandbagging, and, prepared for the pets coming in because, when people come to an emergency centre, they bring what matters most to them. So they set up a bit of a wraparound situation there. We had Sustainable Hawke's Bay, who were providing hot meals to I think they provided 20,000 hot meals, and that was with the Sikh community. So that was a really beautiful example of working with people in the community, and kind of being that connection between what people did have to offer, so the volunteers with their skills, and the needs that were out in the community. So yeah, a beautiful range of case studies of people just stepping up and filling gaps. Yeah.
Sure, thanks, Georgina. And now, Harata Shah, I'd love you to talk about the case study around the marae and also your reflections on what are the things coming through from the research. Yeah.
Kia ora no. Look, I could talk about it all day and all night, so I'm going to try really hard. And in hindsight, now I should have probably done a data show or something to cut it down. But I just want to make a few comments. Georgina showed her data show, and one of the comments, one of the lines on there said, the higher up on the run you are, the better, basically the better situated you are. That's absolutely right in our case. I think a lot of what we did, so we've been involved with disasters since Bowler, from what I can remember. At the time of Bowler, my father was the chairman. So we had a lot of people, and of course, Bowler actually affected us. So our marae got, we used to have beautiful terraces outside the marae, 2 terraces that went right across the property. And then Bowler came, and the storm not long after that just took all of that out and made all our pristine lands just straight off. So it's since Bowler that we've gotten a bit more resilient insofar as the marae. So we've just 5 or 6 years ago, we've just finished a rebuild project at the pa, which took into water coming off Titirangi. So we've done a lot of work around that, because we know that and when Bowler hit, we were designated prior to that as a civil defence centre. There, all my life, there used to be this little green sign hanging up on the power pole outside saying civil defence. I didn't really understand what that meant until a civil defence situation hit us. And in fact, it did nothing. It was just a sign on the fence. There was nothing to prep us. There was nothing to tell us this is what it means to be a civil defence. So time went on. So we had a good forerun leading into the weather events. We had a good forerun, well, good, but we were a main site for COVID response here in Tūranga. And in fact, we helped move meat and resources from our pa right around to the whole of the Eastern Bay, which included all Portuguese, Whānau, Apanui, Ngāti Porou, all the way down out the other way, out south. So we learned some things there about, we were doing also during the COVID time, we did bulk cooking. We had a machine that sealed food. So those sorts of things, bit by bit, you learn all these little things that help when you're dealing with. The other thing about our marae is we might get 500 people for dinner. And, we might get 500 for breakfast, lunch, and tea. Those numbers, because of how our marae is built, it can sustain those numbers quite easily. And so it made sense that when Gabriel did hit, we opened up our doors. But I suppose although we were in Tūranga itself, we weren't directly impacted by the weather event. Like, we still had roads, we still had running water, we didn't have power. But then what we got was more of a social problem in Kaiti, the area that we live. Kaiti is part of within our tribal domain. So when power went out, that actually had a huge impact in Kaiti about, people just generally feeding their kids. Now, if you're living in the poorest area and you don't have kai, all those things that we all know about, the whole social troubles come into play. So we were having to take food out, like tables, chairs, barbecues, into someone's driveway and saying, look, if we put this up, could you do the barbecue and cook for your street? Those sorts of, so it was simple things like that. And then there were the other big things. What I learned through it, though, was absolutely right, that if you're not at the top of that chain and can make a decision like that, then it's probably not helpful for you. And the other thing I learned was a lot of the things that we were able to push through really quickly had nothing to do with me knowing the CEO. or me knowing the minister of anything. It was actually our relationships. It was our whakapapa. We knew who the girl was who takes emergencies at WINS. We know who does PD. So when the power went out, and some of these ones living in Aotearoa had an anklet on, we knew they couldn't get over the bridge, you know. So it was about personal relationships that we had built up over a year, and relationships of trust, so much so that so that was really helpful for us, because ended up we got WINS to come to our pa and set up. And then we realized, oh, we need PD here because of these anklets, and people can't get over the bridge because the bridge was closed. So we had them come here. We got the highest population of people in one suburb of 12,000 people. We had no doctors in Kaiti. You know, those sorts of stats, you know that. So we set up this whole hub in our wharenui. We had IRD, we had a doctor, and his wife was a nurse, so they set up in the mattress room. We had MSD, who actually stayed for 4 weeks. We had Kainga Order, we had Department of Justice, we had, and we ended up having immigration, because when that storm hit, the last one hit, Gabriel hit, we're talking of hundreds of men who had no jobs, therefore no pay, therefore no rent, and in some cases, the employment went with a house. So when they were laid off because there was no work, that wasn't just a layoff, that was layoff, kicked out, nowhere to go in the middle of a crisis. So, you know, so we had to threaten some departments that we didn't have friends in. We had to threaten that we were going to go to the press or to the media before anyone would come. And I went on TV with Miriam Makam, or one part there, and I tried to get them, one particular department, to come because it was really important that they did. And they said, oh, no, we've got this under control. I don't know what that meant for them. But I said, well, I am going on TV and I'm going to tell the world that you're not fronting up to 164 men. And so, yeah, they certainly came all right. But it's all those was more about connections to make a move on anything. I suppose one great thing is we're a marae. We're rulers unto ourselves, which can be a really great thing, because, you know, all the actual organisations that are part of a crisis or civil defence crisis, they're actually all paid people who could stop at 3 o'clock or stop work at 5. Meanwhile, we really needed them from 5 to 10, sort of thing. So it was really, and so you get paid people who are paid to do one job. It was easier to work with volunteers who were like a wheke, like an octopus, had 20 hands and could do everything all at once. And I suppose that's the beauty of being a marae, that are not beholden to do it that way, the normal way, I suppose. After that, since then, I attended many with the civil defence about what their plan is, their resilient plans going forward. I stopped going. This is nothing on the people themselves, absolutely nothing on them. But I stopped going because they were it was a step after another, after another, after another, after another. They had all these steps that you had to go through, and that actually means more people to go through. When I needed a generator, first of all, they said, oh, you have to go to this person. Then this one said, you have to go to that person. Now, over the years, I've had a good relationship with staff at the Gisborne District Council. I ended up walking into there and everyone calls me Auntie, so that's helpful. And they go, Auntie, what are you looking for? I said, well, I'm looking for a generator. And I basically just got point, try over there. So I found it. I picked it up and I walked out with it. They're lucky I took it back when it all had finished. But I mean, there's just too many, and I get that they needed to do that, but I don't get it. Because in the case of emergency, I don't care, and I don't want to speak to Johnny, who's at the bottom of the run. I want to speak to Jimmy, who's at the top of the run and can make a decision in the case of a disaster. But yeah, I'm not sure what else. We applied to, so after that happened, we did a big brainstorm, but it was more like a wish list on what are the things we need to be more resilient. So we needed a container that was a freezer, a big outside container where we could freeze kai and have it on hand. We needed, few things, so we got them. Interesting enough, the bigger things that we really needed, and since then, every time there's a disaster, I can just see us using them, and that's a bobcat. You know, everyone needs a bobcat. When there's a disaster, you need a bobcat. You can have front loaders, but they can't get close to a house or anything, any structure. You need a bobcat. So I'm still trying to find so if any of you know where I can get a bobcat from or funding for a bobcat. The other thing was, and this is the one that everyone laughs at, I said, we need a hovercraft. And I seriously mean that, because when that storm happened, the boats were out in the bay, and then there was food coming in, but no one could get out there to bring the food in. So it stayed out in the bay for a couple of days. The other thing was, since the first Gabriel, the roads between here and Tolaga Bay and Whangara are closed so often now that it cuts off Highway 35. But if you had a hovercraft, you could go in and out. Also, when the Gladstone Road Bridge and Ormond Road Bridge closed, that cut us off. We had no doctor. A hovercraft could have been used to get us from this side to that, and with numbers. So again, if you know anyone who's got funding for resilience, we really need a hovercraft. I'm not sure what else I could say, except to say that all of this that we've done is all based on the principle of manaakitanga. There's a song that one of our tipuna Twini Ngāwai wrote, and it basically says your people will judge you. And we all know our people can judge each other. And so, it's just based on manaakitanga. But the other thing about it is funding. When the funding happened, there were so many organisations who got funding. People who were responsible for that funding, to me, was too far removed from actually what's happening on the ground. And you had that tier effect again. I would ask Jimmy, Jimmy would ask Sally, Sally would ask, and so on. But in all communities, I'm sure, throughout New Zealand, I'm sure there's people who know, like I know that Pohorāuri is well known within the space of disaster. Someone from Pohorāuri, I'm not saying it has to be me, but I would get someone from them, from Pohorāuri. I would go to Tūranga Health. Why would I go to Tūranga Health? Because they're the one medical Māori provider, but they provide for everyone, but they're called a Māori provider. They're the other ones who get out in the community and know the community intimately. I would put someone from there, people who know stuff, intimate stuff about their rohe. But what we're getting is, as I said, we're getting Jimmy who knows Jane, who doesn't even know what's happening. And I think, one last thing, and I'm big on this one, the other thing that is really, and I haven't seen any improvement, is communication. Communication, and right up till now, there's been nothing to really if we had a disaster today, there is still no grand plan on how we are to find people. And I learnt this because when the Fijians, when the disaster happened, we had a couple of Fijian men come, and I said to them, so how many of you, of your Fijian community? And he says, there's 100. I said, where are they? He said, we don't know.
Mm.
That was bad. So we gave them 2 of our vehicles, petrol card, and told them, go and find your people and come back. But we found that still the communication hasn't improved for them. If something happened tomorrow, there's no communication that has gone past Gabriel for them. We had to find translators for all the Polynesian. We have liquid all sorts here in Kaiti. We had to go and find translators of all of them, so we knew exactly what their problem was, so that we could help. So those are big deals. But communication, everyone needs satellite phones. Every major organisation here, if it's preschool kōrero, they need a satellite phone, so that from our base we could check on all of them and say, check your people, there's something coming up. Then they could ring their people, because the other thing we learned, that when the power went down, that was like, the bridge to anywhere was shut down. And so those are my big things that are still, that I see that haven't, there's been no progress that I could see in that space. And communication is the biggest one, apart from our hovercraft. And
Kia ora rata. Thank you so much. It's amazing to hear it from your experience and to get those insights at all different levels, from the specific things happening at the time and responses and frustrations, as well as those broader future focused, how can we look to the future. We were going to discuss now sort of challenges and actions that people can take. So I was thinking we could either go back and have, because there was a question around that slide that you showed, Georgina, which talked about what are the sorts of things you could ask of your local council. So I was thinking if you could talk to that a bit more, and then if others have got thoughts also in ways that we can, as a society, as communities, step up to sort of push for that action and push for that response to make communities able to be that resilience factor. Georgina?
Yeah, it's interesting. If I can use a specific example, I was just at the Wasteman's conference in Wellington this week, and I was on a panel talking about emergency waste. So what happens in a really big emergency is there is a lot of waste that is generated, and mostly it's the plan is just how do we scoop this up and put it in a big hole somewhere. So right now, there will be councils thinking about holes that they can make in your backyards where they can put a whole lot of waste. Now, some of that has to go somewhere, and they can't put it in a normal landfill. When the person from Wellington was talking, and so they've calculated how much food is going to come from, let's say it's a big earthquake, from the pack and saves and the countdowns. If you can imagine all of that food, and I imagine it's all just been scooped up, and they're going to go stick it in a hole. And I was sitting in the audience thinking about all of the resilience conversations and, thinking about all the examples and case studies. And I was thinking, man, if it's a really big earthquake, they're going to have to feed people in Wellington too. So some people will have stocks. A lot of people will not. Not everybody has the ability to have, 2 weeks of food in their houses. And I was thinking there is probably amongst that food a whole lot of food that could be diverted. And then I was thinking about the community organisations that I'm aware of, like Kibosh, who rescued 900,000 tons of food. And the last statistics, they have the connections in the community where they can get food that is being wasted and divert it to people who need it. And I was sitting there thinking about this mountain of food, which otherwise is going to go into a hole in the ground somewhere that could potentially be diverted. And I was thinking, where is the process breakdown that they're not aware of community's capability. They don't have somebody at the table who can say, we have people who can do this. We have people who could work through that, take out the food that could be diverted, and they know where it is most necessary to go. You know, they know it needs to go to point A and point B and point C first because that's where the most need is. And so there's a bit of a breakdown in our process. And when I talk to people, I think there is this assumption that councils are our community and that they know the right people to go to. And that isn't always the case. And they don't always know the right people. Shah's the right person to go to in Gisborne. Did they come to her first or did she have to react? You know, so so there's a bit of a breakdown. So what we are trying to get, the message that I would love to get through is that councils need to go and find the key people, the community organisations, and we're pretty networked. Community organisations know community organisations. So if we're not the right person, we know the right person who to go to. So we need to get those intermediatory, it's a terrible word, people in the middle who can create some of those solutions so we can divert. And it might not be waste. It might be, there might be many other ways that we can get into the middle and actually, you know, connect the councils and the people with their processes up to the community groups who have been operating for decades and they know how to do things. So it's just getting into that process and it's creating those relationships and that trust ahead of time. And I would be really interested to know around the country how many people are actually at those meetings at the moment where they're planning their emergency responses, because it's too late to make that plan with them in the emergency. And I think I've said that several times because it's just so important to go, it needs to be now. They need to be inviting the community into those meetings. You need to be running simulations. So you need to sit down as a group in your area and go, if this is the big earthquake, who can do these things? And some people are running those, but it's just about making sure there's the right people in the room. So sometimes they're running them and they just have council staff. And I think, what a waste. You have so many amazing volunteers and so many community groups that could be in that room that would give you a whole wider picture of what's going on. And they would ask questions. And right now, you might say, you know, where are these international workers in your plan? Where are the translators? Do you have these people set up? So we've got the questions. I guess it's up to a lot of us to go and ask our local councils and our local civil defence groups to say, are we thinking about our most needy people? Are we thinking about our disability communities? Are we thinking about our labour that's come in from Fiji or Tonga? How are they built into our systems? I think that was a very long answer. I'm sorry. I'll let other people jump in.
Kia ora. Any other thoughts or comments as I follow on from that concept of who's at the table, who, you know, who's being brought into that, and how can we establish those relationships beforehand so that it is that networking and it is that foresight that comes from the lived experience of communities to be able to contribute to that resilience when things happen.
Yeah, I also think that going on from what you've just said, I think that every group, every organisation like council have to have a look at, does their process mean 3 people? And because if it doesn't, it needs to change.
Yeah, I think that point around connectivity is critical. Something that we talk about a lot in our team is the idea of radical collaboration, like where people from all sorts of different sectors are able to join together and drive action forward towards a common purpose. But we don't see radical collaboration at the moment because of exactly those sorts of distanced and multi-layered structures and institutions that you were talking about. Char. You know, it's really a sort of bureaucratization, which is not just in
Oh,
government
yes.
agencies, but also in private organizations, corporations as well. There's these multiple layers, managerial approaches, which slow down that ability for collaboration. And so, I mean, it was just so telling the way that the report, you know, through the surveys of people who've experienced events like this, identified communication as the greatest shortfall, even above infrastructure. And of course, you know, to circle back to my original point, you know, if you look at the state and market approaches, their emphasis is on infrastructure because it's something that they understand. They can funnel money towards it and possibly even make money out of the infrastructure that they're delivering. But that's actually not the highest priority for people. It was the lack of communication, and after that, the lack of support, which is all symptoms of a lack of connectivity and symptoms of a lack of that inability to collaborate. And I think ultimately, the only solution to that is a people first approach. It's whanaungatanga and drawing on the richness of local relationships. I would add, the work that we're trying to do through the East Coast Exchange is trying to complement that on the ground connectivity. We're not trying to use technology to displace or to override those human relationships, but actually to provide some tools which can enhance and that local connectivity and also perhaps access new resources and so on, whether that's the sorts of tools for digital payments or whether that's the data collection sort of side of things. And while I mentioned data, because data is a big important piece of the challenge, I think data can help with the connectivity, but with to enable data to flow freely, you need trust in the system, which is transferring and using the data. And certainly in our era, there's a justified lot decline in trust of companies that use data, especially some of the larger companies. And so any technology and any approach which is going to generate data about community resilience and community response, it's going to need to build trust, especially through governance. And so that's why, for instance, the East Coast Exchange has, Tauranga Nui o Ngāti Porou and Gisborne District Councils are co-investors into the East Coast Exchange to ensure that there's appropriate governance and that therefore that there is community trust for the way that the data is being handled and managed and used.
Apologies, I was muted. Kia ora, I just thanked you, David. Chad, was there any comments that you wanted to make around follow-on sort of prompts, key message, or actions?
Oh, the other thing I just wanted to comment on what David just said was about the data. I learned so much after Gabriel, because government departments were coming to me for data, and then I realized in all of our busyness, we didn't capture. There's a lot of data we could have captured, but of course, everyone was doing everything, and no one was doing data. So, but I think to help the hub or the marae or the school, whoever's doing a community thing, that also, apart from the communications, they should also be helped to put in someone to do their data, to sit there and capture true data as it's happening. Otherwise, the data that's captured from us afterwards is not actually, it's best guess data. But because we all know from then on, funding was based on data, anything you wanted was based on data, and because we didn't actually have that. So I think that's an important thing to remember too, that somewhere someone should be thinking of that.
I agree, Char, and it really requires easy tools which aren't time consuming and preferably even sort of passive. But again, it's that trust piece. And if you look on the East Coast Exchange, you can see there's a repository there of data from people through Tairāwhiti who were sharing data about their own site-specific and local challenges that they face. And that could be a incredibly valuable resource going forward because it obviously enables better planning and better anticipation of where the impacts are going to show up and what impacts specific communities are facing.
Where was that?
East Coast Exchange.
So I'm just going to segue a little bit. I'm conscious that it's now 12:56, but there's also the question that was asked around the current fuel crisis, which is set to continue to be a situation where community response and resilience is needed. And I think that actually prompted me to think, and I just thought that concept that in preparing for, I'm going to go disasters, it actually shifts the whole setting if we're talking about relationships and connectivity with local government and community, more networked, um, more connected, really, in terms of thinking about different situations, and that it's a whole shift that isn't just about those disasters, but also can provide that platform for broader response in different situations.
Yeah,
Georgina, yeah.
I think it is. But also even the homelessness. I read that the data showed our children in year 2000, in 100 years' time or whatever, but even the higher number of homelessness all around the country, even in Gisborne here. And I do wonder what's the plan for them in the case of this. We know now where we sit because we have whānau saying, look, they're a bit short from petrol. They need some money to top up, or could we help with that? And also, now that a lot of farming communities are having their petrol stolen. So all of those things, all of them become, because from where I sit, that just tells me there's going to be a social problem from that. If people can't get from A to B because of the petrol, then there's going to be a social fallout from it, especially in Kaiti.
If I could just quickly comment, I think one of the most interesting things I've seen is that we need to shift from looking at technical responses or technical solutions to social solutions, because technical solutions will be very siloed. They'll look at one aspect, whereas when you approach it with a social solution focus, you have to look at all of the different variables, and we have to do that, and it has to be localized because that's just where the solutions lie.
Kia ora. Now, there's one Q&A which Jen's put through, because Jen's been looking at the questions coming through as we've been having our kōrero. Just a final quick around discussions in communities around the incoming El Nino and increased fire risk aspect. Are people aware of activity in that space? Is that something that is part of that action that can be asked about in terms of connecting with local councils?
I've definitely seen it rurally. So the Rural Support Trust and some councils, at least rurally, are discussing that and their responses.
Kia ora. So I'm going to actually have to close this off there. We're at 12:59. Thank you so much to all the members of the panel and Jen for a really broad, but at the same time, very focused conversation in this webinar, where we can go away and think about, what are the different things that we could do to connect up, but also that shift in terms of, it's not just asking about money and resources, there's actually that connection, that relationship, that that councils and also those that can cut through those layers of bureaucracy in those kinds of situations and events. So yes, thanks again to all of you. Thanks again to the audience out there for coming and hearing this webinar and participating in this webinar. This webinar has been recorded, so we'll be notifying people when that recording becomes available. And I think Jen mentioned that the slides that Georgina presented will also be put up as a resource on our webpage when that recording is shown. So I'm now going to just close us off with a karakia. So kia ora, thank you so much, everybody. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mo tēnei wā, mana ka tia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, aio ki te aorangi. Ka kite, and ngā mihi nui, everyone. Kia ora.
Yeah.